Okay, let's go ahead and get started, folks. Welcome everyone. This is the Making Collaborative Decisions in Earth and Information Sciences. So this session came out of discussions on the operational ethics cluster, although I think I might be the only member of that cluster on the organizing committee. That was the impetus for this particular session. So if you like geeking out about this, you are more than welcome to come join us, and I will return to this later. I am also going to highlight in the Google Doc that's linked off of Sketch. If you could go in and put your name and your email address there, we will be sending out sort of a little one-page recap at the end of this session based on what we've harvested from all of you in the breakout rooms. All right, so come on, driving someone else's computer. So part of collaborations, you know what, we're gonna put this, there we go, okay. So one of the things that I like to do when I start my collaborations is figure out who's in the room. So that's what we're gonna kick this session off with. A little bit of introductions for your hosts. I am Kathy Todd Brown. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Florida, and I collaborate for transdisciplinary science and to build collaborative tools. So that's my motivation for coming into a lot of my collaborative spaces. And so with that, I'm gonna ask my fellow session leads to stand up and come up to the front and introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Leslie Shi. I'm at the USGS. I coordinate the community for data integration, and the reason why I love to collaborate is it helps to build data project teams with varied expertise and perspectives.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Blake. I develop tools and workflows for better data sharing and data documentation.
Hello, I'm Alicia Witt-Charlson. I'm from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and I work on a data analysis platform. And I like to collaborate because it takes many minds to make movement.
All right, so now you know us. Now you get to know each other. So we're gonna do 2 minutes of introduction. I'm gonna start this timer, name, affiliation, and why you're here in this particular session. For the Zoom rooms, do we have people on Zoom? All right, so for the people on Zoom, you should see some Zoom rooms popping up, and we're going to let you pick which room you go to. I'm going to run this timer twice, so you each get 2 minutes to talk about yourselves. So turn to your neighbor, preferably someone you don't know.
Kathy, would you mind unmuting?
Else is watching the Zoom room because I forget to do things like unmute. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is what exactly are collaborative decisions? What are some options that you have for making collaborative decisions? There are multiple structures. Why would you want to use one particular structure over another? There are trade-offs and benefits for each of them. And then what are some of the common problems that pop up in each of these structures, and how can we address them? These are going to be crowdsourced discussions, so you're looking at your discussion prompts here. But we're also going to give you a little bit of scaffolding to help launch those discussions. So let's dive right into, not mute myself, hit next. What is collaborate? To collaborate, so this is a dictionary definition for you. And collaborate just simply means to work jointly with others together, especially in an intellectual endeavor. So the P here being working jointly. And in my experience, that means that you need to make joint decisions. Someone needs to decide something. So the interesting part here, from my perspective, is less the working jointly together, but how are you making decisions about that work? And we're going to break that down into 4 categories. And I'm drawing from both the definitions, and the iconography here is from community rules. If you have not seen community rules, this is linked into the notes document. It is a fantastic webpage. And we're going to talk about benevolent dictators, duocracies, circles, and consensus models. So let's go ahead and kick it off with benevolent dictators. And just so you don't listen to me the entire time, we're rotating.
Okay, I probably have one of the more obvious ones to people in this room, even though you may not know it yet. You've probably worked with or for a benevolent dictator. Who went to grad school? Guess what? So from the community rules template, benevolent dictator, they define it as someone who holds the ultimate decision-making power, comma, until the group is ready for a more inclusive structure. We'll come back to that part later. So the goal of the benevolent dictator is to have a vision, right? I think most people can agree that oftentimes when you went to graduate school, your principal investigator was the one that had the long-term vision of the research program in that particular group. They recruit team with complementary skills. Oftentimes they're trying to find students to do work on proposals that got funded. But also, making sure there's a lab manager, making sure potentially a data manager, if you're lucky. And so their job is to really find the people to help get the job done. Provide resources and support, oftentimes in the form of funding, but also hopefully mentorship, career development, a lot of other on-the-job sort of training opportunities go into the overall benevolent dictator role. And then oftentimes they're helping lead the team towards a shared goal. And that could be loosely worded in the sort of academic PI space, because you joined a lab and they have an agenda and you're kind of along for the ride, but hopefully your agenda fits in well enough that you have a shared goal. So that introduces you to the benevolent dictator.
So our next structure, which may also be familiar, is duocracy. And so the definition here is that those who take the initiative to do something can decide how it actually gets done. But this requires certain cultural settings, norms within the group of people that you're working with, particularly a culture of participation. Because there's not, unlike the benevolent dictator, there's not one person sort of taking the lead. It's whoever wants to do something actually makes that happen. And the responsibility attaches to the person actually doing the work rather than the role itself. So a couple examples of this could be the ESIP clusters themselves. If there's a desire for a cluster, you can set up a cluster within ESIP. Another example is the Open Source Geospatial Foundation. They particularly in their organizational documents describe themselves as a duocracy. And their mission statement is to foster the adoption of open geospatial technology by being an inclusive software foundation devoted to open philosophy and participatory community-driven development. And so they really are explicit in saying that they're structured in the duocracy way of doing things.
The third type of collaborative decision-making is consensus. And here, we may have all been part of informal groups where we want to make a decision and we want to make sure everyone agrees. So here, decisions involve the participation of all participants. And I think that figure kind of in the middle here illustrates nicely how if you just add a couple more participants, there's a lot more understanding and communicating and participating that needs to happen. If somebody wants to do something or a decision needs to be made, that is discussed until all concerns are addressed, because you want to be inclusive and include everybody in all of their concerns. And moving forward only happens if there is no serious objections that remain. So you can see sometimes that may impede moving forward. One example that I will give is you see a screenshot of many different government agency icons there, logos, and that is for the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy Year of Open Science. And here, each of these organizations needed to get permission to join into this Year of Open Science, and for the charter and for any documents or decisions, they really wanted to have consensus and everyone to agree before moving forward and putting those documents out there. So that is consensus.
All right, I've got the last one, which is going to be a little bit different. So this is a circle decision-making structure. And here decisions are made by small interconnected groups with empowered domains. And I put an example up here from a collaboration that I'm working with right now, the Hawaii Climate Smart Partnership. And what you can see, let's actually break this definition down. So small, none of these groups are more than 10 to 12 people. Most of them are 4 or 5. Interconnected, so every time one of those bubbles touch, they share 2 members in each of the groups. So there's communication between the 2 groups. With an empowered domain, so each circle has a very specific domain or mandate that they're stood up to meet, and they are given the power to operate within those domains. So this tries to split the difference between sort of, it's not as a huge consensus group that's all inclusive, nor is it as directionless or self-directed as a duocracy. You're trying to get a little bit of both from the best of both worlds there. Sometimes this is also called sociocracy or circle decision making. So if you look in the notes document, there's a link to one of the US sociocracy organizations there for more information on that. And with that, we're going to send you into breakout rooms. If you're online, try to pick rooms with 3 to 4 folks. If you're in person, pick a small neighborhood. And your prompt here is to reflect a little bit more on what types of decision-making structures show up in your collaborations, whether that's within your own organization or cross organizations. And then think a little bit more about, how do you want to collaborate in an ideal world? So you've got 2 questions here. How do you collaborate right now, and how do you want to collaborate? If you go onto the slide deck, stop, not yet. There you go. There are some empty slides. Feel free to grab a slide deck to take notes. Like I said, we are going to be synthesizing this at the end. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Also, think of who you would like to report out. Any questions? Clarifying questions? All right. With that, now you can go, timer. Why? Okay, everyone. It sounds like there's some really great discussion going on. So instead of going and doing a report back group by group, because we are a fairly large group here, I'm actually going to walk down the categories and ask groups to popcorn an example for me. Does anyone have an example of benevolent dictator? People manager, line manager. Hey boss, I want to go do a thing. Can I go do the thing? Anyone else? Benevolent dictator. Principal investigator. Yeah, that one. Anyone else? Tech developer, so thinking about someone who has ownership of the thing. And so if you want to work on the thing and it's their thing, they're the ones that says, yes, you may, or no, that's a horrible idea, don't do that. All right. What about duocracy? Anyone have a duocracy example? Uh-huh.
We can't get together on anything, and our boss shuts down inside conversation. So, as a consequence, we do things and we ask.
Skunk Works, the time-honored tradition. We're going to dive under the table here and just get it done. All right. Any other examples of duocracy? Someone with an idea who's like, hey, I got that idea. I got time. I'm going to go off and do the thing. All right. Uh-huh.
A lot of work where, like, maybe the group decides, what we're kind of working on, but then it's like, figure it out.
So maybe there's some loose group direction, but no real allocation of resource. So like you might have like a suggestion, go off and do the thing. Like an ESIP cluster. Ish, okay, all right. Open source developer. So this is kind of the canonical example of a duocracy. This is an open source project. It's people going off and doing the thing in their spare time. A little bit of cross between a skunk work that maybe you might be working on the clock for. All right, so duocracy. Did anyone come up with an example for circles? I'm get really excited. Oh.
So I'm a PI and I lead my little group like a benevolent dictator.
Uh-huh.
And then I work with other benevolent dictators who lead their own little groups, and then together we all make a project.
There you go. So little PIs carving off little aspects of the project and then still coordinating together in kind of that general, so that bullseye at that front of that center of that circle diagram to coordinate between. Yeah, so there's sort of this hybrid format where within some looser structures you can have individuals going off and doing their thing, maybe without the strict supervision or direction oversight from the collective. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Dave.
We have a circle where every Friday we get together with a group that has DHS and the food, fuel, medical supply sectors, logistical sectors. And occasionally, frequently, I talk to them about new data that's available that might help them. So they all talk about whether it might help their industry.
So sort of like an information exchange with representatives from different organizations coming together and talking through a problem.
Right, and when they like something, then we take a deeper dive.
All right.
A lot of the big reports I work on, I would say kind of as a circle, we'll divide up chapters. Like, for example, it'll be a status review and there are multiple species there. So we divide up into groups, we're working under the different species. And those circles will make all the decisions, and then we all come together with the circles every so often or on a regular basis to make sure that the circles aren't kind of diverging.
Yeah, so sort of dividing up chapters of a larger report between a group of experts. I'm repeating for the folks online. And then thinking of, and each of those chapters are sort of operating independently from a decision-making process, but yet you're still coordinating across. All right, consensus, old school consensus. Everyone has to agree. Go. Protest meetings. Anyone in the social justice or activist communities? Yes. Yes. I see 3-hour-long meetings. My afternoon disappearing. All right. Uh-huh.
All the work that the ESIP clusters do is mostly consensus.
Okay.
And all the NASA Earth Science Data System working groups do.
Okay.
That's also consensus.
Yeah, so some of the sort of volunteer-led groups like the clusters, and then sort of adopted within the data centers as well.
I would call the work I do on developing kind of either agency-wide or line office-wide policy effectively consensus. Yeah, it is small teams that do the work, but there is a process in place to ensure that there's a comment period, and if there's like a showstopper, you have to deal If you don't do it, just sort of, blow past a showstopper.
So thinking about sort of open comment period and how you respond to those open comments, maybe kind of dabbling into consensus there.
It's a, yes, it's not right, it's a little more structured than just like wide open comment from the public, that's a different thing. This is where you're creating a structure because you need consensus in a very large group. It's an internal group, but it's too large to have it be kind of old school, going around in meeting, going on forever, that wouldn't work, but you still need consensus, so you have a process in place.
Yeah, so you're describing some type of hierarchical process to solicit feedback from a larger internal organization, and sort of thinking about, I think that there's some interesting blends that happen in operationally between these different terminologies that might fit into what you're describing there. All right. Standards bodies being another example. Then we're going to take one more and then we're going to move on. Yes. Go. Go, no go for rocket launches. That's actually something I'm very happy about consensus being. I don't want my rockets blowing up. But I think one of the interesting things there is why you're objecting and versus consenting. So for a rocket launch, you're objecting because it might blow up. You're not objecting because, gee, we would get a better picture if the sun was at this angle at this time. So think when you're operating in consensus, why you're objecting becomes really important and critical here. How are we doing on time? All right, spot on, exactly. Okay, I'm gonna turn this off so that we don't. Trying to avoid horrible feedback for everybody here. All right, so I'm going to go through the breakout slides. All right. Trade-offs. All right, I probably don't need to tell you that each of these decision-making structures have trade-offs. There are benefits and drawbacks for each of them. And so we're going to touch really briefly on these and then let you talk through them amongst yourselves again. So, benevolent dictator, please come up.
Okay, so going back to benevolent dictator, there are values and trade-offs. The benevolent dictator might act as a guide, establish core policies, and ideally establish the culture of the group working. But there are trade-offs. First of all, why does everybody show up for the meeting? Who called this meeting? We thought you did. Maybe meetings have become a life form capable of calling themselves and thus reproducing via human hosts. Has anybody gone to a lab meeting where the PI was late or didn't show up and everybody just sits there quietly and stares at each other for a while because they don't quite know what's supposed to happen next? That's a problem, right? So there's oftentimes it stalls out when the benevolent dictator is busy and they haven't assigned a backup or someone else to run the meeting or provide direction. That one's kind of in the middle, but there's also, they have a limited perspective. They might not like to hear they have a limited perspective, but they are still one human, and it is a limited perspective by default, right? And so oftentimes they have a vision, and they're acting as a guide towards that vision, detours from that vision, sidetracks or alternatives may or may not actually be considered part of where they want to go, and they may be resistant to change or push back on that vision. So kind of trade-offs, they oftentimes show you the road and help build culture along the road, but maybe that road isn't necessarily always the road you want to be on all of the time. Guess what? You're on the road. Okay.
So for duocracy, I selected a few values here to highlight. One is autonomy, and that can be a very empowering thing, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But essentially, it can provide room for people who might not otherwise feel confident stepping into a leadership position to actually say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, step out and start this project. So there's not a fixed hierarchy system in a duocracy. It allows for this emergent leadership. And it often allows effort to be rewarded with recognition, and that might not always happen in other decision-making structures. Some of the costs are that there can be no accountability. So maybe nothing gets done on the project because nobody wants to stick their neck out and actually start to do something. Maybe everyone's too busy and there are a lot of unfinished projects because, again, it's up to those people, the doers, to actually get things done. Having no clear unifying vision can also be a cost of this decision-making structure. Not having a clear direction forward can potentially hinder the group's work. And then finally, resentment and burnout can be costs of this way of making decisions.
Okay, if you're thinking about a group that's using consensus, some of the values that you will see in that group is solidarity. So they are standing together in what is decided. Also, empathy is a value here. So in order to get to consensus, usually there will need to be some empathy, understanding your other group mates, things that they want to get done and things that are not good for them. There needs to be some empathy and some compromise there as a result of the empathy. So these are things that you see in those groups. However, these will also lead to some costs. So there is a lot of communication, explaining, and that compromise that may need to happen if there's conflicting goals, but you still want to get to a consensus. Also, some things may prevent consensus or decisions. So some people may be much more comfortable speaking and exerting their desires and opinions, and others less likely to do that. So that's going to affect what decision is made. There can also perhaps be some apathy in the decision trying to be made. So then, like, you want consensus, but is it really consensus if some of the people don't really care that much? And also avoidance. So if there's a hard decision, there can be some avoidance, and that will also delay the decision making that you hope happens.
All right, finally, circle structures. So one of the core values that I find in my circle groups is good enough for now and safe enough to try. This can be applied to many different decision-making structures, but the idea being that the barrier for agreement here is not, is this perfect? It's, is this good enough? Do we meet min-recs? And then trust. So unlike consensus, where everybody is involved in all of the decisions all of the time, for circles, you're allocating decisions to specific subcircles and you're trusting that they will get that work done. So there's a high level of trust in these organizations. So some of the costs here, this can be very process heavy. So if you look at this bubble, the circle diagram here, each of those circles has an organization document, a logbook. They all manage their own policies. And so there can be a lot of operational overhead for some of these groups, especially if you're not used to it doing your own administrative work. Sort of learning how to do that can be challenging. And then who owns the issue? So each of these groups have domains. Some of them may or may not be clearly defined for all situations. So figuring out where a decision goes can sometimes be challenging in these organizations. All right. So we've got another one. So your prompt here is to think about how do your collaborative governance reflect your values and what issues have you seen there? So again, hearkening back to some of those examples that we pulled out, what values are reflected in that decision-making structure? And what are some issues that have cropped up in your experience with those decision-making structures? Again, I'm going to set 5 minutes on the timer. For the virtual participants, I apologize. I forgot to check in with you last time. Lauren or Alicia will stop me this time around, and we'll check in with the chat. All right. And, oh. Yes, all right. And slides, feel free to generate a new blank slide and take notes in here. Like I said, we're going to synthesize all of this at the end. So, all right, I'm going to call you back. 5 minutes is not a lot of time. I hope that we'll continue this discussion afterwards. I love geeking out about governance models. All right, so let's let's just popcorn. What were some things that were bubbling up in your discussion groups? And I'm going to hand off the mic this time. Anyone want to volunteer first? All right, go for it, Daniel.
In a duocracy, you can have people who say they will do and it doesn't get done, and then there will be others who, 2 out of 10 might be picking up the doing of the duocracy.
I can do that. I know how to do that. And then all of a sudden, you don't have the time to do that. I might have done that once or twice, but then somebody else picking that up, and maybe that building resentment in the organization. Anyone else?
I feel like we had some good ones for consensus, because I feel like it's like, especially if you have a big group, it's best if you're making like big decisions, long-term decisions, to get consensus from everyone. But it can also be really frustrating sitting in a room for hours on end trying to get everyone to agree on the definition of a single word that's not really part of your project, and you just need to decide these things to move forward. Just like, can we decide and get on with life, please?
We like consensus. I spent 3 months talking about the definition of a data set once. Yeah, I think everyone feels that one in this room. Getting everybody to agree, especially on big strategic things, is sort of ideal and gives us all warm fuzzies. And it's really, really hard to get everybody to come to an agreement here.
Yeah, I was thinking about the circles in good enough and safe trust. Identifying what that minimum viable product is before you get started, so that you can actually say, no, that's going to go in version 2. Like, mint that version 1 and move on to version 2. Otherwise, you sit in version 1 indefinitely.
Yeah, so I like to open in my circles when we're making a decision, what is our metric of success? And then you use that as sort of your measure, your ruler for your min-rec for moving forward with the decision. So you have to get a little meta.
So I think there's some trade-offs in models that people face. I mean, most of us have to make commitments for deadlines and outputs, whether it's a grant or a contract or, something professional. And, at the beginning, you think you have time to do all sorts of things and let many flowers bloom and people take on responsibility. But at some point, it does get to the point where you kind of have to pull back and say, hey, we can't afford this. Some decisions have to be made, some assignments have to be made. And I think we go all through that, trying to balance those different values.
I wish there was more time. Time being a limiting factor here, and single decision, the benevolent dictator can be expedient sometimes. So you can move things forward quickly if you trust one person with the sort of the strategic vision of the project. Yeah.
Where they ultimately, for organizational or other reasons, are the PI.
Yeah. So or some type of hierarchy appointment there. Yep.
Someone in our group noted that there often needs to be fluidity among the type of governance, right? Like sometimes you need a benevolent dictator for expediency, and sometimes you need consensus, otherwise you lose trust among the collaborators. And so sometimes you need that ability to shift depending on what it is that needs to be done.
Yeah, so this mixed model approach. I wonder if some of the struggle for that would be clarity on which model we're using for a particular decision. So if I go into a meeting thinking, oh, this is a consensus, and I come out with my boss saying, oh, no, you've got A, B, and Z assigned to you, that might not feel so good. But I hear what you're saying about the need for fluidity there between those models. Stephen online, go ahead and unmute.
Hey, everybody. So yeah, one of the things we focused on is how the community and collaboration structure of a person's dominant work life will probably influence how they collaborate, regardless of what the formal collaboration is in terms of structure. And so you sort of have to be ready to work with that, that some people may be more comfortable or less comfortable in a benevolent dictatorship or circles, just to use this sort of two extremes. And that might be a cause of dysfunction sometimes.
Yeah, so there's a lot of sort of personal background that we bring in on what we've been trained on and what we've operated on in the past. Trying to get folks who are used to hierarchies to make a circle or a consensus decision, it takes a little bit of time. And then that calls back to do you have time on the project to build that, not only the consent around the decision, but also the training and the soft skills that are associated with making those shared decisions. All right.
Just kind of on the topic of issues being seen, for me personally, it's been in the benevolent dictator category. It's in that they're in that position because they are someone with experience. What that experience means that they have their hands in about 12 different projects, and so it's just really hard to pin them down. And it's great when they are there and things are fast when they're ready to be working, but actually getting a hold of them can be, a bit of trouble.
Yes, a benevolent dictator is not always faster if that benevolent dictator is over leveraged. Only 12 projects, nice.
Question about reflecting your values. So if all of the advantages reflect your values and all the disadvantages are anti your values, what does that mean about your best choice? Can you actually deliberately merge different ones or do them all in parallel?
So that kind of gets back to Madison's comment on sort of transitioning between them. And I'm going to make the point here that even a benevolent dictator, like skills in empathy and solidarity are important. And probably for a good line manager or a good PI, you're still valuing that. Don't necessarily mean to imply that these are exclusive trade-offs, but maybe thinking a little bit more about weighting some more heavily than others in certain models. Dan, all right. And then I think I'll take one more and we'll call it.
So this one will be short. Benevolent dictator can be a malevolent dictator.
We'll be revisiting that one.
So the first three are all high trust. In a benevolent dictator, you have absolute trust towards the dictator to know what's best. In a duocracy, you have absolute trust towards the doers to actually do things. With the circles, you have high levels of trust towards the different circles that are doing things. And then for consensus, it can be effectively as a zero trust situation where you're trying to build trust with every issue that's being resolved.
I love that point. That if you're insisting that you're involved in every single little decision that's being made, you have no trust in the rest of your group that they will make an appropriate decision. So I think that's a great point to end on. And again, let's avoid microphone squealing. All right. Next, no, stop. All right. All of these have interesting fail points. So now we're going to talk a little bit about sort of common scenarios, about what to do when things go sideways. So what we're going to do is we're going to present you with a scenario for each one of these 4 models. And you guys are going to get to figure out how to solve it. All right. Yeah, so when we go into the breakout rooms, you'll be picking one topic to talk through. If you have time to talk through more, that's fine, but 5 minutes is short. So let's start off with benevolent dictator.
I went the easy route in making this slide. As you can tell, I just took out half of what was on there. So the benevolent dictator goes to just dictator. And they hold the ultimate decision-making power. I should have changed the comma to a period. It's funny when you go online and you start to type these things, what comes up? Apparently Richard Branson said this and everyone loved it, so because it was in about 5,000 different memes. He believes that in benevolent dictatorship, provided that he's the dictator. And then I liked this cartoon. One day, son, you will rule all of this. As a democratically elected leader, benevolent dictator, actually. Well, what about the will of the people? They will listen to you, or you will eat them. Savage. So I think from everybody's experiences, you might have experienced this at some point in your life where the benevolence turns to malevolence. And so I think everybody has a shared story there, and we would love to crowdsource how you dealt with that. What were your options? What strategies did you use? Were those strategies successful or unsuccessful? I have lots of opinions I can share if we stall out on that. But yeah, so that's kind of switching over to the when things fall off and you just end up working for a dictator.
So switching to think of duocracy, when I put this slide together, I was thinking of a collaborative project or an interdisciplinary working group. Again, revisiting the idea that nothing gets done because no one steps up to do something. But more specifically, thinking about the lack of transparency when just one person says, okay, I'm going to go do this, and they go do it, but they don't necessarily communicate what they're doing with the rest of the group. Maybe they bring on 1 or 2 people to work with them that they've cherry-picked, but they don't share what they're doing more broadly. And that can lead to the group being less inclusive, especially when it comes to early career folks. They might not get pulled into those projects. They might be left out. They might not get publications, credit, et cetera, et cetera. So again, to echo what Elise just said, how can some of these problems or these issues be addressed, resolved, counteracted?
Okay, moving to consensus, I want to give you a concrete scenario in your head and see what could be needed to work through this. So this is a difficult decision, but consensus is really valued, but something needs to be cut. So this scenario is halfway into the project. The team finds itself with too many sub-projects and not enough resources. And some parts will need to be cut so other parts can reach completion or even be functional. So the team agreed that consensus is important and they want everyone to agree what's the priority, but they each have their own sections that they have invested in and they would really rather keep doing that and keep going as is rather than change course. So how can we get out of this and make the tough decision if you still value consensus?
All right. And I think that this one's going to resonate even with people who maybe aren't in circle making structures. But in my experience, a whole boatload of meetings. So many meetings. Oh my God, so many meetings. So this is 6 months into your 30+ person project, and everyone, and I mean everyone, is tired of meetings. So most circles here meet every 2 weeks, but some folks sit on multiple circles. Your core of 10 people are spending 3 to 8 hours a week in meetings, and they are not 100% FTE on this project. Folks did not plan for this workload, and other tasks are starting to slip. What do you do? All right. So with that, any clarifying questions before we move in? You don't have to talk about these specific scenarios. This was to give you a flavor of some of the things that we've seen go south in the different structures. Any other questions? All right. Pick a scenario. Could be one we gave you, could be your own, and discuss. 5 minutes. Okay, for real this time, folks. All right, so coming back, let's cycle through these in order again. Benevolent dictator turns malicious. Malevolent dictator. Anyone have strategies for dealing with a malevolent dictator? Change jobs. I might have done that once, yeah. Malevolent compliance, malicious compliance, malicious compliance.
Cheerful participation.
Couched as cheerful participation. All right, how else do you deal with a malevolent dictator? Wait until they retire, someone says.
Already been mentioned. First, those that can leave, those that stay duck their heads, and eventually HR somehow or other learns they have a problem.
Yeah, so rely on their boss noticing. Uh-huh. Anyone else?
Create an interface to the dictator who can deal with the dictator, and everyone goes through the interface.
Padding.
See if the dictator has a dictator.
I think these can all be categorized as managing up strategies. Oh, Stephen online.
We came up with open rebellion and/or negotiation.
Open revolt! All right. Documentation, and then pass it to HR is another common one. Okay. Come on. Duocracy.
So I work in software, so I make a conscious effort to bring a young team member along with me so that they get the experience to be the next generation, right? But we check things in to Git, and that's great because if somebody wants to see what I'm doing, they go look at my commit history, and that's kind of a unique thing, which then I found out everybody's using Git for different things, right? So it's a great tool. These things are good, but the demo, right? So in the sprint cycle that we're in, we demo every 2 weeks. So I'm held accountable to show all my peers what I'm doing. So if there is some blindness on when I'm doing work, hopefully within 2 weeks, everybody gets to see what I've accomplished.
Okay, so sort of engineering process for accountability and for documentation, and then also it's sort of a self-preservation practice for sustainability to help train up the next generation. Yeah, there you go.
Similar to that, documenting who says they're going to do what, when, and then having a group check-in where you can shame people if they're not doing it. Or maybe not shaming them, but say, hey, good job to the people who did it. And then it's like, hey, where are you on this thing you said you were going to do? Remember, you said you were going to do it.
Social pressure. Never underestimate the value of social pressure. All right. Anyone else for duocracy? Stephen, online, go for it.
We talked about installing a facilitator, so not necessarily somebody who has decision-making power, but is there to sort of guide and keep an eye on, is things getting done, are things getting done?
Yeah, so sort of thinking about another process there, possibly being facilitation in addition to sort of software and Git commits. Nice. All right. Let's go on to the next one. Consensus. How do you make decisions nobody wants to make? I like my project. What do you mean we don't have time for that? Anybody? Quit.
So I think you need someone with a bigger, like, programmatic view to help you make the tough decisions.
So reminding everybody of sort of the values and the perspective of the broader group and trying. Yeah, so trying to pull people back to that broader perspective and larger value statement.
Another thing that we talked about was potentially offering alternatives, such as, you know, maybe this goes in the next version, so that people don't feel completely sideswiped and they still have a little bit of investment in it.
So trying to be creative with your yes and solutions there.
One thing that we were kind of looking at is it seems like it's easy for the consensus, where it kind of stalls out, to kind of turn to a duocracy as people just start doing things, and then just whoever then does stuff does it, and then so for the.
Yeah, so someone mentioned fluidity in sort of these different governance models and flipping between them, and maybe one solution is that we just flip to a duocracy. Okay, you don't have to agree that I'm going to spend my time doing this. I'm just going to go off and do it. Ellen, online.
Yeah, so for the online bunch, we talked a little bit about, again, bringing in an objective facilitator type role, or maybe conducting some sort of SWOT or other semi-quantitative process to kind of rank things as a group and have a little bit more objective approach to what you are prioritizing.
I'm hearing metrics. So thinking about sort of metrics and value statements and trying to, as a group, turn those into a little bit more of a hard numbers as opposed to just, but I like my project. All right, and then I also heard mediation facilitation and bringing in a mediator for the project.
What I haven't heard, and it's not exactly in any model, is a survivor model where everybody basically votes off the part of the project that doesn't survive. No, yeah, but it's voting because it's not consensus. Because as in all the reality shows, somebody.
Yeah, so you'll notice that not on here was majority voting or ranked choice voting or any type of sort of voting model here. Part of that was deliberate to try to get us thinking, because most of the time when we think about collaborative decision makings in large groups, we default to democratic voting or representative voting or something like this. So this was to try to get us thinking a little bit outside the box. But you're right. So thinking about either attrition or downvoting aspects of the project as a group, that is certainly one way out of this. Oftentimes, I've seen groups have something like consensus -1 or 85% consensus, so like a supermajority when they get to these roadblocks. There are downsides to that, but that's a common way for groups to deal with this. All right. Last one, my personal favorite. All the meetings, all the time. I don't know about you, but a bad day for me is 7 hours of meetings. Ooh, we got a hand, we got a hand.
So I know in our case, our project has lots of meetings, and one of our project coordinators actually brought up a really good presentation point, and she said to triage the situation. So, hey, can this be a short, sweet message? Can this be an email? Oh, no, well, maybe we just need a quick one-on-one tag up. Oh, wait, no, this needs to be a whole meeting. So I thought that was really interesting, kind of relating it to like triage, and then also keeping in mind too, time constraints. Do I need a quick response? You know, things like that, so.
So I'm hearing being deliberate with your mode of communication and what you're asking of people in that meeting. I try not to get on meetings without agendas these days.
So I have a project where we do have a like standing meeting each week. However, we've said the first 5-10 minutes is kind of check in, how are we? And then if we're good, we don't need any in-depth discussions, then we get the rest of that hour to work on that particular project. And so it's a nice placeholder on our calendars to get things done.
Yeah, so thinking about, do you need that meeting? Go for it, Alicia. Kate, online.
Yeah, so I think that we were looking at circles. So the situation is you're getting too much input and feedback because you're meeting too frequently. So as others have suggested, you might just need to promote use of asynchronous collaboration so that people can go off and work on their own and perhaps tag up and share information in other different ways rather than actually having to call a meeting every time.
Yeah, so asynchronous communication, Slack channels, emails, thinking about what you're asking from whom. So I will share that this was the first 6 months, and so we were just figuring out how to do things. There was a lot of scoping and sense making and kind of what is this project that we all bit off that's huge.
I guess I get the impression that people also then get swamped in Slack and email because every little issue is now a separate little thing you have to deal with, and people get upset if you don't get to it, so you can't concentrate for 2 hours because you're getting dinged or pinged every 2 minutes.
Yeah, ping, 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 ping. One thing that we did, I'll volunteer, is that we made more, we actually said, okay, this is in your role. You decide how this gets done. So we started making decisions more as roles and trust individuals to do the thing as opposed to circles. And so that's how we ended up solving this. So we have a question here about voting for leadership in the circle. So we used a different mode of nomination here. So we have a facilitator for all of these circles, and then we collectively decide a role description, and then we go through a 2-round nomination process, and then the facilitator puts someone up for consent for that role. So it's not voting per se, because there's no like, if anyone objects, then it's off. But because there's 2 rounds of, okay, well, this is why I think this person would be a good fit for this role, it actually turns into a very sweet process because you're like, this person does this really, really well. And oh, this person also does this really, really well. And so it can be really good relationship building.
Yeah, the multiple meetings has been a big problem for a lot of my projects as well. And one of the things I've really started doing is thinking, does this person really need to be on this meeting? Maybe they need to be part of the project, but I don't need to invite them to this particular meeting, and I can give them a break. And same with emails. Who's on my to list? Who's on my CC list? Can I remove these people? Or I may need to add this one person for this particular thing. But who can I take off and give them a break? And then still communicate that I still trust them and I'm not trying to exclude them, but I'm just trying to keep them from so many meetings.
Thank you. So the lead PI for this meeting, or for this group, was like, I have to be on all of the circle meetings. I have to be everywhere because I am the PI for this project. And that lasted about a month. It's like, maybe I don't need to be in that one. All right, so we're gonna do two. Okay, I'm seeing you're on the stack and you're on the stack and probably one more. Go for it, Matthew.
Just along the lines of like, just essential meeting etiquette of like building an agenda, saying, and then responding to the meeting invites if you're gonna go or if you're not gonna go, because you might be on the agenda, but you don't show up, and therefore nobody's gonna talk about that, and another hour is wasted of your life. And there was one other thing, but I forgot what it was. So.
Be delighted to talk with you afterwards about it. Online. Or Alicia.
Yeah, I was just made a comment that I don't know if everyone's familiar with the RACI chart, but doing that at the beginning of a project for each topic, you know, who needs to be responsible, informed, invited, that can be a really helpful way to set at the outset, like who needs to be consulted, informed, responsible, accountable, who's going to be invited to what, and just being really clear early on so you don't get into a messy, just invite everyone or this person feels left out.
I like that. So just being very cognizant of who's a decision maker and who's sort of getting feedback on everything and whatnot. I hadn't heard that acronym before. I like it. One more. Oh.
Just to sort of re-emphasize the online conversation, thanks Ellen for speaking up. Megan also puts in something about having clear decision making and when there needs to be input and when there doesn't always need to be input from other circles.
All right, one more comment. Who wants to close us out? Go for it.
So so groups meeting every 2 weeks, and where it's all the meetings are like a kind of an update, means that, right, that's a lot of meetings where you're just updating. And so intentionally having meetings that are like work meetings where, okay, we're coming together. It might not be the whole meeting, but you say a half hour at the end of this meeting, we will have the draft of XYZ. That works if it's a smaller circle. I can't do that in a big one, but so to make sure that products are coming out of each meeting.
The update could have been an email. Yeah, and then thinking about deliberate co-working time. So these are all great strategies. Thank you. All right, so with that, there we go. All right. So I hope that this has given you a little bit of time to reflect on different decision-making structures. I know we talk a lot about tool stacks and software and semantics at ESEP, and I wanted to give us some space to think about the processes and the decision-making paradigms that are supported by all of our tech stacks there. Each of these decision-making structures have trade-offs. There are costs and benefits for both of them. There are fuzzy areas in between, and some groups switch between them. So just be purposeful in your choice and be aware of the compromises that you're making with each of these models. If you want to geek out about this more, come to the Operational Ethics Cluster. This is the type of stuff that we talk about all the time. We meet, I think, every other week, sometimes once a month. And yeah, I hope that you had a chance to talk with somebody new today. Does anyone else want to say anything? All right, with that, enjoy the rest of the conference.